All right, welcome to Living Alchemy. Today we have our special guest, Tessa Malcarne, here to have a great discussion on brain retraining. And for those of you who aren't familiar, Tessa is a long-term brain retraining coach. She worked for DNRS for quite some time and has some of the most experience out there as far as neuroplasticity. And so we're lucky to have her joining us today with her wisdom. And we are going to be talking about a topic on brain retraining. And our topic today is looking at the traits of clients who heal with brain retraining alone versus those who need a deeper dive and inner work processes, kind of like what we're doing in Primal Trust. And talking more about brain retraining, what brain retraining alone helps with versus specific other types of programs. And I asked Tessa to think about that topic and bring some of her experience and what she sees, and then we're also open for discussion and having you guys chime in, those of you who are on the call live today. So if you have questions while either of us are talking, just put it in the chat box and we'll take the questions. So Tessa, I'm going to turn it over to you.
And okay.
Yeah.
All right. Hi, everyone. Nice to be here. So let me first say that I believe anybody can rebalance their nervous system with a brain retraining program alone. If that's the goal that you create for yourself and you're set on accomplishing it, you can. But I think most of us here in this community are here for a reason, right? Because it's tricky to do that. And I'll explain why. But if this is somebody watching this recording on YouTube, for example, it's possible. What I have come to believe over coaching lots of clients and just kind of observing and looking at personality types, I think that there's a specific personality type that I think makes it easier to use brain retraining alone, and it's a pretty unique personality type. And I think some of us have little bits and pieces of what that personality type looks like, but most of us don't, and that's okay. And I'll explain why I think it's actually healthy. So in order to use brain retraining alone, I think you would have to become an expert at pruning pathways. You'd have to become really proficient in distraction and ignoring, and be able to elevate your mood in the presence of some really uncomfortable stuff, which, you know, we all are in like a constant process of getting to that point. So it can be done. But for most people, a very strict, structured, one-size-fits-all approach is just not as effective as an approach that's altered, tailored, and fitted to each person. And we've talked about this, Dr. Kat, in our previous talk, so I won't go too deep into it. But we have to think about how different we all are from one another, coming from vastly different experiences in life, ending up with enormously varying belief systems and values and personality traits, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I could go on and on. Look at even like siblings that we have, that we're all so different, even coming from like the same background, the same family. So that's why I believe most people need to step outside the box here and customize the brain retraining to fit their own personal needs. And we should feel comfortable doing so, since all of our brains are wired so differently. But to explain the traits I see people have who are able to heal with brain retraining alone, I think that these people are really good at ignoring and distracting. They can ignore even the loudest outcries from the limbic system, and are able to successfully distract away from them. They're experts at saying, nope, limbic system, I'm just not listening. And they can truly ignore and distract away. And that's really hard, as we all know. It can be very uncomfortable for the limbic system. It takes so much strength to ignore and distract. And over time, that does prune away pathways. It does. It can absolutely do the job, but it's not always what I believe is healthiest for the limbic system. And I think most of us recognize that it's not the healthiest thing for the limbic system in a lot of situations. And we realize, wait a second, the limbic system's asking for something different. The limbic system needs to be heard, to be validated, needs nourishment, wants to be comforted. Maybe it needs me to help it understand some trauma from the past so it can let go of the emotional charge that that memory has. And I think most of us who are here have heard those outcries from the limbic system and desire for something other than just ignoring and distracting. And that's great. That's either way can get the job done. So I also want to say that there are pathways that just need to be pruned. And I think all of us could probably give a couple examples of that. So distracting and ignoring can be very effective, a very effective tool to address pathways where, let's say, for example, the limbic system just wants us to question every little thing. Saying, nope, we don't go there anymore. Nope, nope, nope. We focus elsewhere now. That's perfectly fine. But to do that everywhere with all of the pathways and all of what the limbic system's communicating to us, that's a different story. So to continue on with some of the traits, Dr. Katz, do you want to jump in and say anything before I continue?
I think that you nailed it when you said is a particular personality that has a large capacity for distraction. What I see is that there are certain personalities, and I often and I hope this isn't offensive, but I often call them the kindergarten teacher that can be like, oh, look at the bird out the window and let's be so happy. And let's, they're just able to totally go into another realm. And almost to the point like a kindergarten teacher where it's like, we're going to just distract off from this, and they're masterful at it. And so I really like that you highlighted that, master distractors, and there is a time and a place for distraction. There really is. And and like you said, there are some pathways that we need to use the strategy to prune them away because they are not helpful. They're not things to be looked at. They're simply meaningless pathways that keep us stressed out. And so the discernment, I think, is the key of what pathways that are triggering me. Do I need to use the distraction technique versus which pathways are being lit up that are actually emotional charges that need to be processed and met? So I really like that you've made that distinction. I totally agree with that.
Yeah. So to kind of dive deeper into that personality type that you are talking about, I see that these types of people who are who can use brain retraining alone are easily impressionable and suggestible. Let me first say that most of us, when we're experiencing having an impaired nervous system, are impressionable. I don't know, Dr. Kat, if you ever talk with your clients about that, or if any of you listening really think about that. But an impaired nervous system is just biologically wired to be impressionable. As we think about, I think we've all heard this or experienced this on our own, where we hear of another person who has a certain condition that we might have a little bit of a fear towards, or we've heard things about, and all of a sudden we think it's going to happen to us, or we think it is happening to us, which is so silly because this person lives 2,000 miles away and their condition has absolutely no influence on us, but it happens because when the nervous system is impaired and hypersensitized, it's more suggestible to other information, and we can be easily influenced by what other people say. So that's not necessarily what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the kind of person who is told, who was like this prior to having this nervous system impairment. Somebody who is told something and believes it without questioning. And I think we've all met this type of person in our lifetime. I haven't met as many, but I think I've come across it in my coaching. And these types of people are able to be more vulnerable without fear of rejection or failure. And many of us are are not like that when we have an impaired nervous system. I definitely wasn't. I questioned everything 800 times. And I think we need to make the distinction between a healthy questioning that comes from the prefrontal cortex, and then this unhealthy questioning that comes from the limbic system, because it's questioning out of fear or doubt or worry or mistrust. So let's also make that distinction as well. So do you want to jump in at all and say anything?
So I'm just gonna recap that so that it makes sense. So what you're saying and what you've seen is that people who can rewire with brain retraining alone sometimes have a certain tendency that even though they're able to rewire, they're highly distractible and they're often highly suggestible. And although there is a rewiring, and we'll probably get into this more in a minute, there's often an unhealthy rewiring in that their capacity to handle life is much lower. And they're also, because a lot of the suggestions they were given, like, oh, you need to do this 1 hour a day, you do it for 6 months, are like, okay, I'm going to do exactly what I've been told. And they do it and they have a particular type of healing, but then life comes along and that algorithm doesn't work for them, and shit hits the fan because that particular suggestion isn't working for them. And so what you're saying is that although suggestible and it might help them recover with brain retraining, that there's an unhealthy aspect to that. So I'd like to hear a little more about what you think is unhealthy when someone is highly suggestible.
Yeah, so I think that when we are highly suggestible, we just have to be observant and aware of that, because I've had clients go to seminars and things, or they are in these WhatsApp groups and somebody says, oh, I experienced this thing. And then all of a sudden I have a client coming to me needing an urgent session saying, I feel like this is happening to me now. How is that even possible? Well, that's that highly suggestibility. That's just kind of what happens when we have an impaired nervous system. Now, we have to observe that and notice it and recognize that we can create a boundary, that we don't have to be so easily suggestible or vulnerable to other people's thoughts and ideas and what other people think and believe, like we talked about the first time I was here. Like how somebody who has this new thing that they're doing and we think, oh, I should do that too. Well, think about it for a second. Let's think about if it's best for us, if we think that it resonates with what we believe is going to help our nervous system to rebalance. So I think it's just about observing that natural tendency that the nervous system has right now, and noticing if we're not doing something about it, if we're not addressing it. Make sure you're addressing it and you have that boundary up that says, this is me and that is them. It's so simple, but I feel like I've said this so many times in coaching, like that is an entirely different person that has nothing to do with you. I am me, that is them. I have strong boundaries put up around myself, or even imagining like a force field that is protecting just me from other people's thoughts and ideas and experiences. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Tell me what I missed.
Yeah.
I feel like I missed something.
And anyone listening, any questions that are popping up, please chat them in so we can answer them here as we go. Yeah, I think that suggestibility, it's a double-edged sword, because on one hand, you can suggest, well, let me just say that I see this personality presenting like this, and I used to be one of these people, so I can speak to it. They're the kind of people that you can go to a new doctor and they're like, oh, this is what's going on, you need to do this, this, and this. And all of a sudden you respond so well because they figured it out, and you just start taking this thing, and all of a sudden you're just doing really well. And then all of a sudden, like that same thing doesn't work. And then you go to another practitioner and they're like, oh, it's this. And all of a sudden you start doing really, really well. And then it doesn't start working. And that's a sign to me of suggestibility and this savior that comes in and tells you what the problem is to fix you. And your whole nervous system responds like, oh, we found the answer. And the problem with that is that yes, you get these temporary reliefs, or maybe you start a new program and you read like, oh, you can recover by just doing this, and it starts to work. And then all of a sudden it doesn't start to work. And I see that like ebb and flow. And it is the suggestibility that's often causing that initial response, rather than their own conviction of like, okay, this is what I need to do. And this is how, this sense of internal compass that I see people make progress. It might not be that initial leap of like, oh, I'm all better. It's more like, okay, this makes sense. And they make more of a steady progress over a period of time, rather than that initial leap of symptoms are better and then crash. Symptoms are better and then crash with every new person. Does that make sense, what I'm describing?
Absolutely. Yeah, you just made me think of another point that I wanted to bring up. I've had clients go to practitioners, doctors, or even do like different like therapies or diets or whatever, and all of a sudden they feel better. So they are, looking at that therapy and thinking, it healed me, it fixed me. But then 2 weeks down the road, they're losing some of their progress, and then they come to me saying, oh no, I'm not better. What happened? Well, what happened is initially when you are looking at that therapy and thinking, this can heal me, this is going to heal me, you're allowing yourself to believe, which brings on a calm, a peace, a sense of hope, right? You're able to elevate your mood more. But it's not that therapy, and it never is. Therapies and things of that nature can be a support to us, right? They can aid in the rebalancing process, but they're not the answer, because the answer is within us. And I think when we allow ourselves to be highly suggestible and kind of fall into that pattern, that it gives our power away. And so then we're not doing the work within that needs to be done. And I think a lot of times people who heal really quickly, people who say, I healed with brain retraining alone and it only took me 3 months, I find that my clients are jealous and envious of these people. Well, why can't I do that? Why isn't that happening to me? Well, I don't know if you want it to be you, because there's going to be things that come along down the road that the people who healed really quickly do not have the tools to address. So let's gather the tools across this timeline of how long it's taking us to really and truly rebalance our nervous system, because we need to have an authentic relationship with our nervous system for our entire life. You can't build that over 3 months. Right? So we have to, look at what we're doing within us. It's not the therapy that fixed us. It never is. I remember taking a ton of just supplements and things, and then for a couple of days feeling so much better. Oh my gosh, I'm so much better. Look, the supplements fixed me. And then days later, symptoms heightening. And it's because I didn't have the tools to re-regulate my nervous system on my own. I wasn't having ongoing dialogue with my nervous system. I wasn't talking to my inner child. So those tools that we are acquiring, that's what rebalances the nervous system over time. And that's what we should be proud to know that we are building. And it takes us all a different amount of time. And that's okay, but we're doing it. And it's not a quick fix. And we shouldn't be envious of those who were able to make it a quick fix. Because if we look at it like this, there's going to be bumps that those kinds of people are going to come up against, and they're going to need tools. So they're going to have to find them.
Yeah, if I could, share from my experience, what I see in this field is I often get people who reach out to me and they say, I was all recovered. I did DNRS or another brain retraining program, and they totally recovered in this particular amount of time. That seems amazing. And then they had something in life happen and they come to me and they're like a mess. They're an absolute mess again. They're like, but you can't tell anybody because I already recovered and I'm like this celebrity because I recovered in 3 months, and they can't know. It happens all the time, you guys. These radical success stories. And then secretly, I've got several of them taking my Primal Trust mentorship, but can't tell anybody because they're the DNRS poster child. And they're not. They had that quick recovery, and then life hit them and they didn't have the tools to process the emotion because they never processed anything to begin with. They distracted off from that one thing, and then another thing came and they haven't, they have to either distract off that or process it. And so, the looking at people with envy that have that quick recovery because they found their answer, they found their fix, they found their healing, they distracted themselves. Not that this happens with everyone, but I think a lot of times that life still hits them in all sorts of ways, and they end up having issues in other ways later and end up coming back right back into the same thing. So just know that what you see out there isn't always reality. And those of you who are on the journey of learning deeper tools of emotional processing, somatic presencing, polyvagal regulation skills, trauma healing, inner work, you're developing a skill set to handle life with reality and presence. And brain retraining is a beautiful tool of distraction and rewiring in that way that is needed to calm the limbic system, but it is not an all-in-one healing tool for many people. For some people, it's enough, but for many people, it is not. So just really want to emphasize that. It's so important. I see a chat. No, I often struggle with how much to do mood elevation and positive activities versus inner work and sitting with my emotions. I'd love to hear your opinion. So I will let you answer that, Tessa. What would you say of that balance between elevation, positive activity, brain retraining versus the inner work and sitting with the emotions?
Yeah. When I was rebalancing my nervous system myself, I tried to use as much mood elevation as I possibly could. But I think that as we try to use as much mood elevation as we can, we notice when the nervous system or the limbic system is needing something else from us. So I always default to try and elevate your mood all day if you can. Listen to happy music. Tell yourself, I feel amazing. I feel wonderful. The sun is beautiful. Try and do that as much as you can, but you're going to notice that at times the limbic system is saying, hey, but I'm sad because of that thing that I was reminded of earlier today. And the more we get to understand and know our nervous system, the more I think we recognize, oh, that memory from 10 years ago flashed into my mind 10 minutes ago. That's why all of a sudden I'm feeling sad. And we start to notice those patterns. And so I think, elevate your mood as much as you can. And when you notice, oh, my nervous system just flashed me a memory, then you address that at that time. That's my personal belief in how I would coach my clients and how I have seen success. Dr. Kat, do you have something totally different that you would say?
Not totally different. No, I think, so the way that I kind of train people with this is I say, when your physical symptoms are causing you so much distress that you can hardly function, that's the time to brain retrain yourself into somewhat of a steady place. It might not be the time for emotional processing because you're physically in so much distress. So we need to calm the limbic system down. You do your brain retraining, you get at least to a certain point where you're functioning. And then I think, as you said, Tessa, again, you're trying, emotional elevation is always a key thing, but your nervous system will start to communicate like, whoa, there is something here that needs to be presenced and addressed. And once you have that initial skill set of, okay, I can calm my limbic system down. Now I know I can go into this mood situation and work with it, whether it's through the presencing we do in Primal Trust, emotional freedom technique, or any other method. You know, you have the skill set to then elevate your mood again afterwards, so you don't get stuck in it. So I think that my answer is making sure that you have the capacity of that you have the wiring in the brain for emotional regulation. And if you're going through something really tough, you know, you're not going to spend all day processing. You're going to make sure like, okay, I am going to elevate my mood today, but I am going to set aside some time today for this processing, because that's being realistic with life, and that keeps you from being a chronic distractor or having toxic positivity. So yeah, that's what I would say.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think we do want to sandwich the emotional processing with some emotional uplifting.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm. As another person writes, I can feel the difference now between forcing mood elevation and organic mood elevation. That's a beautiful way of putting it. And there might be a time early on in our recovery or in really tough times where we do need to force it to like keep our brain state somewhat sane and to help balance a really out of balance body. But eventually there is a time where it becomes more organic and you start to learn what your body needs. And sometimes it's to cry, and sometimes it's to laugh. And that's when I think the healing is this, it's a relationship you end up developing rather than forcing your body to be happy all the time in order to be safe. That's the unhealthy aspect that Tessa was touching on.
Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I think that's a beautiful statement as well that was just written. It made me think of that it's tricky to find the emotional elevation during times where we're feeling very symptomatic. And when we're feeling very symptomatic, it's not always the time for emotional processing either, right? Because we're just feeling too overstimulated. So I think when that happens, we want to try and just find the acceptance and surrender to those symptoms. That's, I think, the caveat that I would say is like when we're really symptomatic, instead of going to that emotional processing, it's like, all right, let's use the tool of surrendering, like totally let the body go limp, do the deep breathing techniques, smile really gently. And then once we can lift ourselves out of that, then we can go to the emotional processing. Just a side thought there.
Yeah, I think that you're describing that moment of surrendering into trust that we talk about so much, and
Yeah.
presencing. So sometimes it's not emotional elevation, and sometimes it's not emotional processing. Sometimes it's simply presencing. And in that presencing, developing pathways of not resistance so that it gives the autonomic nervous system the capacity to shift states a little easier, because sometimes when we are symptomatic or really emotional and we force a shift, we have protective aspects in our nervous system that clamp down even harder. So I think you're describing this time of neutrality that we also bring into play. So thank you for outlining that. So emotional elevation, presencing neutrality, and processing of emotion.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
Oh, I see a comment. While positive emotions can help me at times, it feels so authentic to take time to face the raw emotions. Knowing when to use different tools has helped me. And I know there won't be a perfect line between different tools that help me. You know, I will just tell you today, I've been so busy with work. I have had almost zero time to myself, and I'm driving to go pick up my kids. This was just an hour ago. So this is Dr. Cat real life. And I'm sitting there and all of a sudden I start quivering and shaking in my heart. And I'm like, oh, well, that's interesting. And I just breathed a little bit and I'm like, what wants to come through? And I just started to cry. I started to cry, and just the words mama, 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 a memory for whatever reason was flooding through. So I'm driving and I start doing my EFT tapping and just letting it through. I've got a 20-minute drive and obviously my body wants to process something. Why? I have no idea, but it did. And I just tapping and crying and like saying the word mama, because that's what came through, and presencing it. And there was a sandwich. And then as soon as I pick up my kids, all right, I've spent time with that aspect that for whatever reason needed some attention. And I went right into like being elevated with my kids and like happy and how was school today. So, but it felt so good when I just took that time. I had a lot of yawns and it just was like, I don't even know why, but it wasn't like I was going to sit there and go, stop, stop, stop. My brain is stuck in a rut. It was like, no, I need to process this. I need to feel this. There's nothing wrong with this emotion coming through. It wasn't the time to elevate. It was like, I've got this time. I'm going to be with it and process it. So yeah, I'm just speaking to that, facing the raw emotions. It feels good. And, here I am now, I'm fine. I met it. I met it fully with the little time I had in the car.
Wow. That's a great example.
I see another comment. I've heard that when you feel emotion and feel it and let it pass through, it only takes approximately 90 seconds. Is that for a non-limbic person? I think that is a good question. And what I understand about that is true when it is the raw emotion and it's not on repeat. With limbic impairment, if we have any protective parts that come in or memory structures that start getting pushed on repeat, which happens with limbic system impairment, it can be a little trickier, and that's how we can get stuck with it. But I think that, as a rule of thumb, how do they measure that ability to process an emotion? It takes 90 seconds. I don't know. I know that is a study that's been done out there. But I'd say that what it does mean is that if you can just give yourself absolute presence with that emotion for even a short period of time, it's effective. And what I think happens a lot of times is people start to presence an emotion, but then a story comes in and they don't actually spend 90 seconds with emotion. They end up spending a lot of time with story. And that is a very different thing and a really important thing to discern with that statement.
Yeah. I would say that would be for a non-limbic person. I agree with you, Dr. Kat. I think that when our limbic system is hypersensitized, that the looping patterns and like the constant grasping that the limbic system is trying to do with us is going to take quite a bit longer than 90 seconds. And that's okay. That's okay. We have tools for that.
Exactly. And then that discernment of what's story and what's actually emotional processing.
Yeah.
Really good description there. See, another comment. It wasn't until I was willing to meet my emotions and acknowledge my parts that mood elevation practices became more effortless. Right. For some people, I find, and Tessa, I don't know if you experienced this, but a lot of people that end up coming into my Primal Trust mentorship have said, well, I tried DNRS, I tried Gupta, I tried Vital Side, I tried these brain retraining processes, and they just don't work for me. I can't do them. And often I find that for some of them, there's a protective personality there where they're not interested in gaslighting themselves with positive emotion. And for some people, giving them permission to feel emotion in the way that we do in Primal Trust allows them to be like, okay, now that protective part says, now that you're letting me feel a little bit, okay, we can elevate our mood. And I've seen that happen several times. Do you have any experience with that?
Yeah. Can you give me another example of that so I make sure I understand exactly what you're saying?
So someone has learned brain retraining and they are trying to do it and they just can't, they actually get worse. And when I see that, and usually as I speak with them, and if I do a consult, often I get them to describe what it feels like, and it feels like they're gaslighting themselves. And there's a part of them that's like, no, I'm not going to pretend it's okay anymore. I had to do that for so long. I refuse to say this is okay. And so when I can see that part that's at play, that's beautiful, because it doesn't want you to gaslight anymore. I give that part a strategy, and I give them some type of emotional processing that they can do, as well as brain retraining. And I describe that that part gets to have time to meet that emotion. And in exchange, can we let these other parts who need a little break get some elevation? And usually we do some type of, like parts work exchange, and then they allow that to happen. So that's
Yeah.
an example.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I've had so many clients come to me like that, and most of them feeling like failures. Like, I've done this and I was supposed to see these results. Why am I not seeing them? And having coaches who also made them feel like they were a failure, which makes me so sad. And I think that they get to a certain point where it just feels like nothing is working, but it's only because, like you said, they're tired of gaslighting themselves. I love how you've coined that term. We have to look within and to see what the limbic system is needing from us. And most of the time, what I tell my clients is the first thing is label those emotions. Stop running away from them. Tell your nervous system what you are feeling. I think that the nervous system, when we're running from emotions, or we're distracting, or we're pretending they're not there, the nervous system's looking around for where that threat is. So if we're feeling angry at something that happened in the past, the nervous system is right there looking to protect you from it. Doesn't understand that it happened in the past, right? It thinks it's happening right now. So it's focused on that, and we're not telling the nervous system, I'm angry. I'm angry because something happened in the past. We're just feeling that anger and saying, oh, I feel happy. Oh, the sun's so beautiful. That's not going to work, and we're just going to keep coming to dead ends when we continue to do that, and yes, feel like failures. So label that emotion, right? Confront that emotion and validate yourself for having it. And I don't know if we've talked about that in the past. I can't remember, but that's my go-to with clients. Label that emotion, take down the activity in the amygdala immediately when you do that, and validate yourself. And then I think the nervous system will allow you to work with it more after that point of like, okay, this is what we're feeling. You don't need to look for the threat.
Right, exactly. I think in my brain retraining program, my ABC technique, one of the things that I've tried to encourage is, in part A, there's an awareness process, and the awareness might be, I'm angry, and there might be some stories and stuff like that. And in the brain retraining program, we're trying to interrupt the story, interrupt the belief that might be negative, but not interrupt the emotion. And we actually go into a second part where we're presencing the emotion. So, and that's kind of a tricky discernment, which is interrupting the story, interrupting the belief that's really negative, but not sending the message to the nervous system that the emotion is invalid. And that's important part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that distinction, and it needs to be made. And I think that we can get lost if we don't consciously make that distinction and understand that that's really important.